Dr Paul Bate, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks very much for having me on, Ben.
No worries at all. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time. I know you're a busy man. Let's get straight to it. What are the UK doing in space?
Oh, we're doing so much in space. UK is, the truth is, the world is. And I guess we're used to at one level. We can all look up at the skies at night. We all know, some of us have lived through, some of us heard about the Apollo landings. But right now, not only are we doing this phenomenal science work, we've just launched the James Webb Telescope, this enormous space telescope, launched on Christmas Day, and all the exploration. We're going back to the moon. We have the first woman on the moon. We're taking robotic missions to Mars. But just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, is what we're already doing for life down here, for our way of life. Because the truth of it is, not a lot can really happen these days without space, right? The financial sector, our stock markets rely on position, navigation, timing data, just as much as our sat-navs do. We're reliant on it for communication. So there's just so much that's about our way of life today. We're not going to get very far on the climate emergency unless we monitor and address it from space. Something like half of all the key data that we need to address climate change comes directly from satellites. And the UK has a pivotal role in all of this. That's before I've even got on and get me started on launching small satellites from the UK. And that starts in this year, 2022.
Absolutely. Well, you're relatively new in the role. I think you've been in the role for about 6 months. How was it coming into it? Was it a sort of information overload? And what programs were you most impressed by?
Yeah, it really was. People talk about this sort of drinking from the fire hose. It did feel like that. So I spent 20 or so years in healthcare. I got a bit of scientific background from way back when, but it's a long time since I did my particle physics. So it did really feel like having to sort of come up to speed quickly in my first 6 months. Now, the first thing is that everyone was really generous with their time. People within the agency were great, but at least as much so, out on the road. I spent most of the last 4 months I've been in post now. Most of it travelling, listening, talking, up and down the country, internationally as well. What am I most impressed with? Look, it is great seeing the progress that our teams across the UK are making on that launch that I mentioned. So I went up to the Shetland Islands to see the Saxavold spaceport. I'm going up to Sutherland at the top of the Scottish mainland next month to see the work that Orbex and Heinz Enterprise are doing with their spaceport. I've been down at Newquay to see all the preparation that's going on for the launch that's planned for this summer. So just on the launch side, it's phenomenal, but also on the manufacturing to see just how many small satellites are being built, not least up in Scotland. You've got Clyde Space, you've got Spire Global, but down in Surrey. I mean, I can keep on going. I mean, and it's good fun just going to the Mars Yard in Stevenage at Airbus. So whether it's the different industry or whether it's academia and sort of talking to scientific colleagues, oh gosh, there is a lot to be excited about.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the Sutherland spaceport. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because unless you're sort of into the space industry and in the UK, probably haven't heard of it. Is it? So it's going to be the UK's first official spaceport.
Well, let's see. Like, the whole approach that we've taken with UK launch is to help it along. We've given over £40 million of grants to different spaceports and space launch providers and operators. But we never wanted to say, look, here's the one. We wanted this to be a commercially viable market. We want the UK to be the go-to place, certainly across Europe, for small satellite launch. And the best way to do that is to have more than one part of the country, more than one operation vying, is probably the right word, vying to be first, vying to kind of to take their place in the market. So whether it turns out that it's Sutherland first or it's Saxavold first, those are both vertical launches, or the horizontal launches in Newquay, in Cornwall. let's see. It's not easy, is it? Putting satellites into space. No one has ever launched a satellite into space from Europe. Never been done. So, we've got to do this well. We've got to do this safely. We've got to manage the environmental concerns. And the truth of it is that all the different operators are working with the different spaceports, going, as fast as they can, but safely. So we'll see. We'll see who gets there.
So if Spaceport Cornwall is the one, would that be sort of Virgin Orbit as the provider there, taking satellites into orbit?
Yeah, that is exactly right. So you imagine a 747. They have a 747 called Cosmic Girl. Right? It's launched its rocket 3 times successfully from the US. So it launches out of the Mojave Desert. But it's not just going to launch out of the Mojave in the future. And it's coming to the UK this year. And as you say, you're going to go down to Newquay over this summer. And this is what will happen. It will take off from that long runway at Newquay. It'll head out to sea. And as it gains altitude and it gets to the right point, from the left wing, where this rocket, this launcher, is held in place, the clasp, if you like, is unclasped. The rocket drops off the wing, a very safe, very tested way. The plane banks, the rocket goes from horizontal to vertical, and up it goes. It's a really interesting, quite precise way to get a payload into orbit. So that's what's going to be happening this summer.
That's super exciting. I guess, is the UK geographically well positioned, being the sort of northern, well, not the northest point of Europe, but it's relatively high up. So geographically, is that an advantage to having a spaceport in the UK?
Yeah, it really is. So for a lot of orbits these days, you want the satellites to be going over the poles. So these so-called polar orbits, or sometimes even called sun-synchronous orbits in one particular type of polar orbit. But the key thing is that you don't want them to be going around equatorially. You want them to go in these polar orbits. So being in a sort of northerly latitude, that helps. But the other great thing is that you want to have some sea around you. We're always thinking about how we minimise safety risk. So taking off from Newquay and then using the Atlantic, or going directly north from either the sort of top of the mainland in Scotland or from the Shetland Islands, are examples of kind of really safe, really advantageous ways. I would say those are not the only 3 spaceports. We've got 7 in development in total.
That's super cool. So in terms of timelines, it's always difficult to have any certainty about timelines in the space industry, especially. But what's your sort of personal aspiration for when we're going to see a spaceport in the UK? Are we talking within the decade, or do we have to wait a bit longer?
Oh no, we'll have a spaceport in the UK this year.
Do you know what? I heard that, but I didn't know if I could. I could say that. That's super cool. So we're hoping for later this year, potentially the summer, and the UK becoming the first country in Europe to launch satellites into orbit. That's pretty cool.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's
so cool. Previously to being at the UK Space Agency, you mentioned that you were in healthcare. So you were the VP commercial a health company. How did that role prepare you for coming to the UK Space Agency? Because it's obviously a very different industry. Were there sort of any synergies or similarities? Or
yeah. So, I mean, they are different at one level, right? in those obvious ways. But at the same time, healthcare and space, they are safety critical industries. They are industries which are growing. They're vital to our way of life, right? And people are fascinated and interested by both. So there are quite a lot of similarities there. But the other part of it is that a lot of, I guess, what I've been trying to learn to do over the years is be a halfway decent manager and leader. And whether that's in factory, or whether that's in healthcare, or whether it's in space, that's transferable. Something I say to a lot of people about in space is that most people, when they think about space, particularly when you're younger, you think astronaut. A lot of people want to be an astronaut. We've just had, well over 100 people get qualified as through the next stage of the big European Space Agency competition to create the new astronaut cadre. That's great, right? But that is just one tiny element of what we can do in space. So whether you are a bit, like me, with some sort of scientific background and some kind of leadership stuff, or whether you're a software engineer, or whether you are a designer, or whether you're a finance person or HR, the truth is, space needs all those sets of skills. I always say that to people, if you're thinking that you want to do something awesome, if you want to, reach for the stars, right, you might as well make that real and go into space. But specifically for me, I've found that it helps a little bit to have done the physics, done the science, and sometimes you're knocking around with lots of doctors, as I guess I did in my previous career. It's quite similar to knocking around with professionals in other fields. The main thing is it's just about working well with people, having a bit of a willingness to talk about what's going to make a big difference versus just a kind of a little incremental difference, and helping people go on that shared journey to something that's really dramatically better than what we've got in place at the moment. That's kind of what I've always tried to do.
Absolutely. You took over from Graham Turnock. He also had a PhD in particle physics, so maybe there's a sort of correlation there. But how are you looking to run the agency different to him? So how does it sort of work when you pass the baton on? Is there a sort of formal handover and then a period where you sort of learn the ropes, or is there a sort of agenda from government that sort of transcends the leadership, that sort of is just carried on?
Yeah, so Graham and I handed over well. Graham's got an amazing job now in the European Space Agency, so he's still very much there in the field, and we talk regularly, which is really good. Ask him lots of stuff and do lots and lots of colleagues. So the agency isn't sort of somehow on its own. It's not free floating in the universe. We now have this thing called the National Space Strategy. So it brings together all of the government's ambitions across the civil side of space and the military defence side of space. First time we've ever had that. That's really, really important to the agency, and really changes the way that we can lead it and take it forward. Because now we know what it is that the government is saying to everybody, what the scale of ambition is, and that's a pretty ambitious document. So coming into the agency, I could look at that document, I could ask people that I was working with, what do you think we should do? And really the question that I would ask everybody when I was out on the road up and down the country was the same one. It was like, what would be a really, really fantastic agency in your eyes? What value would it bring? What would be its point? What would you like to see it do? And people said they wanted to see three things. So I'm just going to go and do with my around 300 colleagues. We're going to do three things. We're going to try and do them really well. We're going to make sure that the money that's coming into the UK space sector is as big as it can be. We talk about catalysing investment. Because the truth is, the French, the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, they all spend a lot more on civil space than we do. But that's okay. Point is, we will use our money, our taxpayers' money, to better effect. That's what I mean by catalysing. That's one big area that we will do a lot of. Secondly, we've got to deliver missions, deliver real capabilities as well. So there are 17 science missions for space that the UK Space Agency already oversees. I expect there to be plenty more. But it's not just the science missions, brilliant though they are, or the exploration. It's also the live services that we're delivering, for example, around what people call space sustainability, right? Helping satellite operators understand if a piece of debris or another satellite is coming in their direction a bit too quickly. A conjunction event gets called, right? We provide that service. And there's UK launch. So that's another program that we need to deliver. So delivering stuff in space, that's a big part of our job as well. But there is a third part, and sometimes that gets overlooked. That's about championing space for our way of life on Earth. And I think that is so important that we don't just assume that everyone thinks space is great. I do, I suspect you do, Ben. But we have to make the argument as to why space matters for people's daily lives. We have to, I think, help kids to be inspired by space, and I hope that helps them go into STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths careers, particularly girls, particularly kids from disadvantaged backgrounds and kids of colour. And there are so many industries that benefit from space. And the truth is, not everyone's going to succeed in the new world. There's massive digital transformation. There's massive sustainability agenda. If you're in farming, you need your crop yields to be high. Earth observation satellites help you do that. You need to make sure you're staying sustainable. Satellites help you do that too. So we have that whole championing space alongside catalysing investment and delivering missions and capabilities. It sounds quite a lot, right? But actually, if we can just focus on those three things, I think we can be a great agency.
I agree. I think championing space is certainly something that the UK Space Agency can do well. How significant was Tim Peake as a source of inspiration for encouraging children of all ages to study STEM? Because you see his face everywhere. You know, when you land at Heathrow, you see him, and it's quite. You do feel proud as a Brit.
Yeah.
As you've already mentioned, the European Space Agency have announced that more than 160 applicants from the UK are through to the next round of the astronaut call. What would it mean to the UK if we had the first female or non-male UK astronaut? How significant would that be for us?
Well, first thing to say is Tim is just phenomenal. I mean, he's a terrific astronaut. But he is so much, he is a source of inspiration. He goes up and down the country, he packs halls out and packs venues out because people are fascinated, not just by what he's done, but the way in which he can convey the sheer amazement, the sheer wonder of space. And 6 months on the space station in 2016, that's truly something. Never
it really
had
is.
a British astronaut that spent anything like that amount of time in space. What would it mean to have a female astronaut? Well, of course, we've had Helen Sharman already, but I in no way want to take away. It would be a tremendous thing. I think there's something about if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I want every person in the country, every kid, to understand that space can be for them. Space can work for them. Space is working for them. And if that's what they want to pursue, and if they're willing to put in the time and the effort, then they can make it. I get emails from 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. I had an email from a 12-year-old saying that I've done all the courses, I've done all the astronomy that I can get my hands on. I'm out in the back garden every day. What more do I do? And I think it's amazing you're 12 and your astronomy skills are way better than mine are. There is such passion out there. We just need to help everybody to recognise what a great opportunity space is for all of us and what a great career it can be for so many of us.
Completely. The UK Space Agency sits under the for non-UK listeners, it's government owned. It sits under a department for business, energy, and industrial strategy. I don't quite understand what that entails, but it sounds like quite a lot. Are there any challenges there being part of such a big department? And does that differ from someone like NASA, who is still a government department, but sort of very much their own brand and their own entity? Or that's how it's perceived anyway.
Well, look, we are civil servants, we are part of government, and that's completely right. Right? It is the UK Space Agency. We get, we are spending taxpayers' money. But I think the UK Space Agency is set up well here because it's called an arm's length body, and it's got that nature to it. And I think there's over lots and lots of different agencies that are in this sort of type of organisation. They're government, but they are at arm's length. That gives us a level of independence around the way in which we spend our money. I can make choices. I have to do that within a framework. That's only right and proper. And And as I said, that national space strategy tells me which direction to head in. But actually, I think we've got that about right. And I wouldn't, I can't see any big issues. It's just like anything, when you're working in government, you see all the good stuff, see some of the trickier stuff, but that's nothing new. Certainly isn't a space-only issue.
Absolutely. You've had some experience sort of working within government. When you were a civil servant, you were a policy advisor for David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister about 10 years ago now. I don't want to talk about politics, but did that experience... what did that experience tell you about how governments think about, fund and prioritise space in their agendas? Because I guess it's difficult for some leaders to have space as their sort of key manifesto commitments due to their relatively short periods in power.
Yeah, I've been so lucky because I worked directly for David Cameron, as you said, and for Nick Clegg. Also worked for Tony Blair back in the day. So I've kind of been able to see different prime ministers and leaders operating. And you're right? No prime minister, no leader can focus on everything. They can't prioritise everything because then they prioritise nothing. I remember Tony Blair, he said, these are the 10 things that we need to get done above everything else. Now, fast forward to the present day, we have a prime minister who is passionate about space, including UK launch, who chairs a National Space Council. So I don't think we could ask for any more than that in terms of that personal interest and association. I know that's also felt by secretaries of state in business, energy, industrial strategy, you said, by in the Ministry of Defence, in transport. So we really have a lot of interest from our sort of publicly elected leaders. And that can only be a good thing. It's on the agency to deliver, right?
Absolutely. What are your personal aspirations for the UK Space Agency, and what are the areas of the space industry that you think the UK can be the leader in? If I know I'm asking a very tough question, but is there one thing that you think the UK can be the best in the world at that in space?
So I wouldn't. The day that we have to only be the best in the world at one thing, I'm kind of questioning what happened. So we are a 16 billion pound space sector, making more small satellites than anywhere else in Europe. Thanks to having OneWeb in the UK, we currently have, as a country, that we have the third highest number of satellites of any country in the world. So there is so much we could do, so much we already do really well. I mean, this isn't just because I happen to work for the UK Space Agency. You can ask people internationally, why did you award that contract to Surrey Satellites, based down in Guildford? Well, they did it because they have the best technology, have amazing heritage and a track record. The breadth of our industry is amazing. So, we can be the best in orbit service and manufacturing. All right, that is a nascent but growing business. We've got a really interesting and I think world-leading regulatory system that helps us pioneer. We've got a great ecosystem of companies pushing the bounds of space. We talk about space-based solar power. We talk about space-based nuclear. We have air-breathing rocket engines from reaction. There are some absolutely pioneering technologies that the UK is at the forefront of. Some of the best startups in the business. One thing that we have to, as a country, make sure that we do well, and I've had this experience when I was in healthcare, is you can have the best ideas, you have the best people, have some of the best kind of underlying technology. We have to ensure that people stay in the UK as they scale up. The business that before I joined the Space Agency, when I joined, there were 100 of us. When I left, there were 2,500 of us. So you can grow fast and you can grow in the UK. And I think that's part of what the Space Agency needs to do. But I'm damned if I'm just going to say there's one thing that we can do brilliantly. There's so many.
I think you're right. It's having that sort of self-belief and ambition and then keeping it, keeping it here and being proud that it's a UK owned and operated space company, I think is great. I was going to ask you what are you most excited about for the future of the space agency, but I imagine it's everything, right?
Yeah, well, I do have a sort of abundance of excitement. It is true. Look, I'm really looking forward to launch this year. That's inevitably that is a very big deal. But throughout this conversation, I hope I haven't sort of highlighted only the things we do on a national scale, because I'm equally excited about the big international collaborations. So the Rosalind Franklin rover that's going to Mars goes up in September this year. It's already shipped. It was built in Stevenage. So that's a great example of international collaboration. By the summer, the James Webb Space Telescope will be actively taking scientific data. I remember when Hubble went up, I remember the optics corrections that we needed. The very, very first piece of research that I ever did was on the faint object camera from Hubble. It wasn't a very good piece of research, but it was the first one. Hubble was an amazing and is an amazing game-changing space platform. James Webb Space Telescope is much bigger, much more technologically advanced, and will look back further in time. We're going to get to see the first stars that ever burned in the universe. We're going to get to explore exoplanets in a way we have never been able to do before. We're going to understand genuinely about the creation of galaxies, because it can look into the infrared, because it can take account of the fact that light itself gets stretched as the universe expands. So, in amongst everything that's going on, I can't help but be excited about what the summer brings for basic science. And of course, the UK has such an important role in that fundamentally international mission. Gillian Wright is the principal investigator on the MIRI instrument, one of the 4 instruments on the Webb telescope. It's just mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. Yeah. I mean, I'm very excited as well, but I can't help but... I have quite a close affinity to Hubble because it got launched the same month that I was born. So it's kind of it's definitely my favourite so far. Talking about sort of international projects and collaboration, I hate to bring up Brexit, but how, if at all, has it changed the way the UK does business in space? Obviously, thankfully we're still a key member of ESA and other organisations, but are there any other challenges that Brexit has brought about to how the UK works in space?
Thanks for mentioning that we are still part of ESA, European Space Agency, because I think not everyone recognises that is a wholly independent body to the European Union. It's made up of its 22 member states, is ESA, and we are a founding member of it. We are the 4th biggest contributor to it. And will continue to play a really leading role. So Brexit has brought some changes, right? We're no longer in the Galileo program, which is our way, or Europe's way of getting position, navigation, and timing signals, or securing them. So we've had to do a lot of work, including in the agency, to work out what our sovereign capability can be. What's the right way, and perhaps system of systems that secures that signal for us. We are right in the midst of some quite interesting conversations at the moment on the Earth observation program called Copernicus. We are all ready to sign up to that program. We've been a member. It's so-called associating is what we would do. Our money's on the table. We're encouraging the European Commission to complete on that just as soon as possible. So there's stuff that happens as a consequence, but equally, it means that we can look perhaps a little further afield than we might otherwise have been tempted to do. So the relationships we have with the Five Eyes community, with America, with Canada, New Zealand, Australia. When we look over for Japan, at the rest of Asia Pacific, space is a global affair. And so for all the challenges or the upheaval that the EU exit has caused, it's also huge opportunities. And, we are exactly where we are today. The job at hand is always to make the best of the opportunities, and where there are any issues, kind of get over them.
Completely. It's very exciting. Look, it sounds like, well, I get a really good energy from you. You've got so much passion, so you're definitely the perfect person for this role. Is it a dream job for you?
Well, thank you. Yes, it really is. And I wasn't sure I would ever say that about a role, having just deeply enjoyed healthcare and had some terrific roles. But oh my word, being part of the space agency, leading it onto the next stage in the decade where we're going back to the moon, the decade where we're exploring Mars, where the Webb telescope starts taking data, where we're doing all the things that we've talked about, improving life on Earth, improving our understanding of biodiversity loss and mitigating that. From my point of view, I can't think of anything better to do. And I say that on a Friday evening as we're talking. I'm pumped up now as I was when I heard that I got the job.
I can tell. That's fantastic. Outside of work, do you have any spare time? What do you do? I can see a bike and some books behind you. Is that a bit of a clue?
A little bit. So I'm married with 2 kids, so that takes up a good deal and a good way of my time. I try to get out on the bike wherever I can. Inevitably, I have to kind of just remember that I'm not the 21-year-old that I think I am when I start climbing a hill, and just sort of keep putting the energy in and sort of staying vaguely fit. I play football still. Again, same issues. That the mind is willing. Even managed to play a bit of squash recently, so I can keeping the sport up. But just generally, space is a good part of my life, but it's clearly not all of my life, and I wouldn't want it to be.
It's been great to chat, Paul. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Good luck with the role. As I said, I really appreciate meeting you and think you're a real credit to the UK space industry, and I can't wait to see what we do in space.
Oh, Ben, thanks very much. I really appreciate the invite to come on. Love the podcast. So thanks very much.
Cheers, Paul.
All right.